okay here. I can hear you.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I thought of this, that I can continue with the iPad.
No, this is great.
Good for you, Judy. Is your iPad charged, Judy? You have power?
Well, I don't know much about this, but that much I know that it's interchangeable sometimes. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we'll do this. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Sorry for the late start. We're just working through some technical difficulties. Oh, it looks like we lost Judy. Judy is back. Okay, good. We're back. We're good. We can hear you. We can see you. Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our second Conversations featuring Judy Cohen and Val Chisholm here. My name is Jason Ho. I'm assistant professor at Dordt University, and more importantly, I'm a alumni of the MRH program. I think MRH 2017, and current chair of the MRH alumni committee. So I'm here to introduce these fine and wonderful people and just listen in on their conversation. So Val Chisholm is currently a learning support teacher in the Canadian Rockies on Treaty 7 land in a little mountain town called Canmore, Alberta, where she calls home. She grew up in Nova Scotia, where she studied at her hometown university, St. Francis Xavier, for all three of her degrees, and which is a bachelor's degree in history and education and a master's degree in administration and leadership. She's taught in Canada and the Middle East, and outside of her work life, she's deeply passionate about equity, kindness, sustainable living, supporting each other, and running adventures in the mountains. Judy Cohen, for those of you who have had the honor of traveling with her or reading her book, you know how incredible Judy is. But I'm going to provide a brief intro just to highlight how incredible she really is. Judy is not only a Holocaust survivor, she's an educator, an activist for human rights, a role model for women around the globe, and a force of good for humanity. She is also an author of Cry in Unison, which honors the unique experience of women in the Holocaust, and to women in the Holocaust, and to Refuse to Be Silent in the face of injustice. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass my virtual mic over to Val and to Judy, who will guide us through a conversation about their experience with MRH and their relationship together that they forged on their trip not too many years ago. So
that's a lie. That's a lie.
Well,
hi.
How many years ago was it, Judy?
Pardon me?
How many years ago now have we since we've traveled together?
Well, I think 16.
Yeah, I think 14.
14. Yeah. Okay. So you grew up and I got older.
So I'm going to duck into the background. I'll be monitoring the chat for Q&A. So please, whatever questions that you have for Judy and Val, they'd love to hear them. Please send them through the Q&A function. And otherwise, I will get out of the way and let these two start their conversation. Thanks so much.
Hi. Anyways.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, should I start asking you a couple of questions?
Judy, you're gonna sure. Let's go for it, Judy. Go for it.
I think so. You know, we really met at a very special kind of march, and so it occurred to me to find out, to begin with, when was the first time you heard about the Holocaust? Altogether, the question that I mean, school or some other means.
Yeah, and just to clarify, even before we begin, Judy, if there's anyone here that doesn't know the trip we went on, it's called the March of Remembrance and Hope.
But you tell them.
Yeah, just in case, the March of Remembrance and Hope. And so we traveled together in 2007. And we visited Germany and Poland, and we went to camps with Judy and Pinkos as Gutar as well. And they shared their stories with us of their experiences. So that happened just as I was graduating. I think I was just graduated from my education degree. So just to give people some backdrop on Judy's and I connection. So we met and traveled to Europe, and she shared her story and then wisdom, and then passed the torch to so many of us. But Judy, your question of when I kind of became aware of the Holocaust and about the trip, I remember it was in high school. There was a survivor that lived in a town about 45 minutes away, and someone brought him to our school to share his story. So I remember hearing his story. That was in high school. And I'll be honest, Judy, I don't remember learning much in high school. I mean, I'm sure I did, but that stuck with me. And then when I was in university, I was in, my education degree, and another survivor came to speak to us. Max Eisen, I think it was.
Yes, Max Eisen would be one of them.
I think it was Max. I actually found my notes from it the other day, and so I think it was Max. And during that, they spoke of the March of Remembrance and Hope, and I had a big star beside it on my notes. And I had gone out to lunch. I think it was with Michael Soberman, and he explained the trip to me. And I was a little bit reserved about it because I was traveling to Africa shortly, and it was going to be a quick turnaround anyway. I'm so grateful that I went for it and applied and did it, because it changed my life. So it's just one of those little things that pops up. And so, yeah.
Okay, well, that's because you were born and brought up in a very peaceful country. Nothing even similar ever touched you, as far as tragedy. So that was very interesting to hear why. Now that you went on that march, was it worth it? I mean, in terms of understanding, I don't mean, I know the experience is, for many reasons, it's very memorable, but in terms of understanding what you learned about the Holocaust and then what you saw there, was it worth it for your later on understanding history?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you think of when you read textbooks or you watch movies, it's one version of learning, but to actually go and travel with incredible humans, you and Pinkos, stayed with us over the years. And I think we can all attest to that. When you travel with actual survivors that, you told your stories at the camps that, the tragedies and atrocities happened, and we'll never forget that. I can't remember very much from, the books that I've read for my history degree, I'm sure, but I can retell your story to this day, 14 years later. I was very grateful when your memoir came out, because there was pieces that I was so worried about missing for both you and Pinkos. I remember there was such a huge sigh of relief when both of you published books, because I now can ensure that I continue to pass on your story, and I don't forget it, because little pieces, they get lost sometimes. So was it worth it? It was probably one of the best experiences of my life. So absolutely was worth it.
Good. Tell me, the fact that we went first to Germany, and whatever remember you saw there, do you think it was worth that trip, where actually Nazism started, and many things you were visiting, you visited? Did it help you to understand the gas chambers that you saw later on, actually in the camps? But they were planning, the Nazi, the elite, but they planned it in Germany. but they implemented it in Nazi occupied Poland. Did it help you that you got that sort of the ideology, what was implemented, and then at the actual tremendous murder machine?
Yeah, I think that what it did, it kind of anchored us for the trip. So it gave us this, and I'll never forget the moment. And I know, Judy, you and I already spoke about it, but we were at the villa where the Wannsee conference took place. Wannsee conference took place. And so we're standing there, and I even went back to look at my journal, and I had written in my journal that we're standing there, and the grounds, like if you Google it, everyone, the grounds are so beautiful. It's almost like a little castle, and the grounds are, it's just stunning. And so I'll never forget it. There was a Dr. McGowan was giving us a lecture while we were there. And, that we're at this absolutely beautiful place with some of the most brilliant minds in Germany that came together to put the idea out that they wanted to eliminate an entire. So I just think that it grounded us, that it gave us that piece of where it all started. And from this beautiful location, they were planning one of the most atrocious things of a lifetime.
The contrast on the surrounding, and then the ideology that, now, do you know that four of those people who planned the gas chambers planned a solution for mass execution, and the gas chamber was just one of the things that they came up with, and quite successful, I might say, from their points of view. But those people had Master of Law degrees. These were educated people. So what do we think about education? That's just education per se, or it depends what kind of education you got, besides the technical education they got as lawyers. It's an interesting thing to contemplate for today. And, for today's universities, as how we're being taught. So I'm just trying to bring together, for your point of view, also you were a student at the time, as what kind of relevance all this will have in your life, all this experience. Once you were there, I imagine it was a shocking experience first, to see all that. But how did you find all the people who came together? It was students came from all over Canada. Did you find that's very enriching?
So that was probably one of the neatest parts as well. I mean, getting to say that we traveled with 2 Holocaust survivors and getting to hear your stories was probably one of the neatest things I'll ever do in my life. But the other piece was that students were selected from all across Canada to go. And we came together as this big eclectic group. And I still, to this day, we keep in touch. There's so many of us that keep in touch. And I think too, when, we all applied and got selected to go. So we all had this common interest of wanting a foundation to learn and do better. And so, I met some of the neatest people in my life, and we've all stayed connected.
So that itself was an experience, meeting all these people, then exchange, I suppose, and ideas. I know we had discussions end of the day usually, but without us, without the survivors there, I imagine you, I don't know whether you exchange notes, how much everybody took out of it, because I'm sure that people were affected differently. What you saw there, which of the camps affected you most?
Oh gosh, I would say I'll never forget we were walking into Majdanek,
Majdanek, yes.
Majdanek, and I was walking in, and Pinchas was beside me,
Yes.
and Pinchas had been there when, gosh, I can't remember exactly. He was so young, like maybe 11, and I remember asking him, because he had told us a story about the bunker he was at, and he used to fiddle at stones in front of the bunker to pretend he was working, so he wouldn't, you know. And I just, when we walked in together, and I had just looked over him and I said, Pinchas, where was your bunker? And he said, just give me a minute, let me orient myself. Where are the gas chambers? And I think, so that was like, I've never forgotten that moment. And, you know, then we were sitting on the stairs at Majdanek, and he's telling his story. And there's and I know other MRHers will never forget this, the huge round ash, of human ash.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the mountain of ash, yes.
And then also learning that camp could be up and running within 24 hours to this day. I mean, at that point, I don't know if it's still, but it was, I think, unfathomable for us to realize that something like that could be up and running again in 24 hours if the world were to see it. And then the one-way tracks at Auschwitz, the one-way train tracks. I remember seeing train tracks coming home, and I have never been able to kind of look at them the same. And then we were also sitting in the latrines. I think, is that what you called it, Judy? While you shared your story. And I know it's something silly, but you know, it's just this massive empty bathroom house, basically, that just stripped you guys of all of your dignity.
Yes, so having survivors with you, in this case, it was a man and a woman, you know, so that's good because you got both perspective. And did it help? Did it help that we were there? Because I found it even difficult to explain what it was like in real time when we were there. You know, we tried, but there are some things you can't explain. You know, feelings, and then the whole atmosphere that we went through, survivors, and I just wondered if it helped you to understand even more what you saw, listening to us. I want to know what impact we have on you, but how useful are we really, survivors, going on this and trying to explain what it was like?
Yeah, I think the impact is that, you know, you shared your story and we never forgot it. And I share it with so many people to this day. And I think that if we had to just, you know, we're at a museum or we were there listening to, you know, someone's story in a headphones, like I haven't remembered their stories. You know, you remember bits and pieces, but we held your story and Pinchas's story so dear to our hearts because we also fell in love with you guys. So we got to, you know, not just hear your stories, but we got to spend so much time with you apart from that. So we all fell in love with you guys. So of course that, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the whole point, I suppose, that we go with you, with students, that to show you the impact of all that that was planned in terms of before we were killed, all the horrors and suffering, what impact it had on individual. Because it's so easy to talk about 6 million Jews and so many millions and so many died here, so many were murdered there. The individual is involved there. And that's was the point for us going along, to explain that, okay, that's the big picture, but how do you connect the big picture with the individual suffering? And I suppose it came across as well as we could, you know, I don't know, 40 years later or 50 years later. But for me, it's an education in itself to listen to you, you know, what impact it had on young people, or in this case, on this group. And this was an older group, university group. So it's a bit different than teenagers, for sure. But so what did you do with this knowledge when you came back? Could you talk about it to anybody who wasn't even there? Could they understand it?
I
If
think
you try to tell them what you saw.
I think that's why we all bonded so closely and then stayed connected with our MRH, with the other members, because I think once you go there and you see something like that, you can't ever forget it. And so many people were willing to listen. I don't know if they could fully, I'm sure they're not going to get the full experience like we do. I shared it, I think what happened with me in particular, I'm in education. So it kind of stripped me to the fact that no matter what I'm teaching, whether it's kindergarten, grade 4, in high school, or if I'm supporting students and teachers, that we all have to come back to the baseline and respect each other and treat each other as humans, and be respectful and being kind and understanding one another. So whether I was teaching kindergarten or, and at a couple of schools, I would swap out for the junior high kids and I would do a Holocaust presentation while they came and taught my little students. But so it has stayed with me. And I guess to this day, always speaking out, even if I know anyone listening right now, they'll giggle, but just standing up for what I believe in, even if it's out of terms or, you're not supposed to, or you're supposed to be quiet, and just always speaking my truth. And we got so much of that strength from you guys.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that, because I think getting people who, you see, the Holocaust did not take place in North America. It's different than when you talk to students in Europe, where the whole thing was played out. That's why I'm asking these questions. So it's very foreign, that kind of cruelty and that kind of hatred to be manifested. Those who only knew peace and were never hungry, maybe at all, or never knew deprivation of any kind, to come across with the absolute depravity of humans, that they're able to do this to other people. That even those of us who went through it, it's an unprecedented thing. We can't quite understand it. So it's good to listen to, and it left you with some moral and ethical questions, I am sure.
And passion.
Well, that's very very important too, indeed. So I won't question you anymore, because I don't know if you want to, just on your own, you want to talk about the residue of that, or
I think I'm ready to question you. I think I'm ready to turn the tables and question you now.
Oh, okay, of course. So anyways, thank you. I think that I hope our audience, whoever is there listening, understood your point of view, and those who came back with this kind of experience, and how it plays out in their lives later on, because it's an experience that's not like any other.
No, and I have nieces now that are getting to the age of, they're going to university, and it's the top thing on my list that I tell them, that if you can get a chance to apply and go on the march, it has such an impact on the rest of your life. It was one of the most impactful things that I've ever done, Judy. So I know on behalf of myself and so many other MRHers, we're just so grateful that you came with us and shared your story, because I know it couldn't have been easy. And that leads me into one of the questions that I have for you. And that it's something that I've thought about over the years, over and over again, was that I know there were so many of us that benefited from you coming with us and sharing your story. And I just, you know, wondered, did it make your journey more difficult as you had to share your story?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I questioned that myself. Should I go to begin with? But you see, it wasn't my first time back in the death camps. By that time, I went on 3 March of the Living marches. But I can tell you, when the first time I went back to Auschwitz after 40 years, I had a feeling I was never there, because nature covered up so much of the misery that we experienced. The camp that I was in was dismantled completely. So I really had to rely on my own memories of it. There were some barracks and the museum kind of barracks, of course, that brought back too many images that was happening when I was there. But by the time I went on the 4th one, it wasn't as shocking, because I knew what to expect, you see. And the more you talk about it, somehow I at least could distance Judy in the camp and Judy today. It is because I will tell you later on as I go on with my life why. But every time it was shocking, and I felt like crying, but it wasn't as devastating as the first time. And even then it wasn't devastating. Too bad, because I didn't see much of it that when I was there. And of course, you don't see the corpses, you don't see really the most devastating part of it, that I was there. So, but no, and then I became a public speaker in between. So that too helps. As you more connect, I became more connected to the history as a whole than just my own story.
And Judy, I know you became more of a public speaker, like it was kind of after your retirement, right? Because you had 2 beautiful kids, a loving husband, Sydney, right? And so and you worked, and so you kind of got into public speaking after your retirement.
Well, let me tell you, that is a good question, and I'm glad to answer it, because about 3 months before I retired, I worked downtown and Bay and Blue, the best shopping area in Toronto. And one lunchtime, I went for a stroll. It was a May or June, very nice weather. And as I was walking on the turn from Bloor in north on Bay, I became aware of a certain kind of noise coming from a little bit from a distance. And I was curious what it was. And as I went closer, I saw a group, about 20 young people, clad in black leather, holding placards and yelling, screaming, "White power, white power, white power." Well, again, it's a feeling you can't explain. For a second, I was absolutely frozen. And I knew who they were. And I recognized who they were. And for a second, there they are yelling and screaming, neo-Nazis, Holocaust denying group. And I said, Auschwitz beckoned. Actually, a nervous stomach, for a few seconds, and then that passed, and then I got angry. And I said, no, they're back here in my own adopted city where I live now, adopted country. All these thoughts went through my mind very fast. I must do something. I didn't know yet what I'm going to do as I went closer to the group, but I was agitated and angry. And as I went closer, I saw the leader of the group, who turned out to be Wolfgang Droge, and was already propagandizing to a group of people. You know how right away people gather around you. And I don't know why he picked the topic. He said to the group he was teaching them, you know, there was no such thing as black slavery in United States. All of a sudden, that was the theme. And I went and I pushed myself between him and the little crowd. And I said, don't believe him, because I figured the next sentence he's going to say, there was no such thing as the Holocaust. I'm pretty sure it was on the tip of his tongue, but anyways, he didn't have a chance. And I pointed to him, and I told the little crowd my propaganda, that he's nothing but a bloody neo-Nazi. These group want to do the same thing that the Nazis in Europe did 50 years ago. And Droga just looked at me, and I don't know what he went through his mind, but he walked away.
Wow.
I wasn't such a hero, you know. There were 4 policemen there. And one of them, an elderly policeman, came over and saw how tremendously aggravated I was. And he said, lady, don't aggravate yourself. They have only 20 minutes to demonstrate. And imagine, I caught those 20 minutes. 20 minutes, they have to disperse. And they did disperse, really. And I went closer to the whole group and looked them over. And there was one girl among them. And I said to her, and she was very nicely dressed and whatnot, I said, what are you doing with this scum? And she just shrugged her shoulders and moved away. It's an interesting thing that this lady turned out to be, she found out she's of Jewish origin from Romania. But that's another story altogether. She's a speaker nowadays.
Wow.
Because she actually testified against them eventually, the Holocaust, this group. So this was and then I decided that day that as soon as I retire, I go to the Holocaust Center and I say, what can I do against fighting this kind of distortion of history, or, against a neo-Nazi group? And that's what they told me, that go and tell your story, witness. And that's how it started. It wasn't by that time, because that was late. It was 1993. That was after I retired. But my other survivors already started doing it. Already, Max Eisen was one of them already. They were doing it. So I was listening to them, and I tried to learn what's happening, that they're talking, watch the kids. And I said, I think I can do that. And I started doing it.
And is that what kind of birthed, because if Judy has a website, it's Women in the Holocaust.
Well,
and
that came much later. That
was
came
2001.
not that much later, in 2001. But what did happen to me, after speaking for about a couple of years, I decided that I don't want to do this anymore. I am no longer a victim. I'm now an activist. And that what happened is I started to learn more about the Holocaust than just my own personal story. And there was a history there. And eventually I learned how it really started, not with the cattle cars, not with the gas chambers. That was the end game.
Yeah.
How did it start? And when I educated myself about especially through the Hungarian process, that was I knew most and best, that how it started with propaganda and the whole historical process in Germany and in Hungary. Hungary pretty well the same, from deprivation of human rights to the gas chambers. That's what happened to the Jewish people. It was a very insidious, step-by-step deprivation of rights, of economic rights, and legal rights, and human rights, so which reduced the Jewish life to nothing. Jews lost their jobs. Then later on, they were restricted, what they can do, where they can live, the ghettos, isolated from the rest of the population, and then the deportation. And so the steps were always some rights reduction, and then finally sending them to their death. But these were political decisions by the government. This is not just one hate group against another group. This was a plan to eliminate the Jewish people. As we keep saying that, 50 million people died in the Second World War and in the Holocaust, but only the Jews and the Roma were targeted for total annihilation. And that was the big difference. So once I learned the bigger picture, I said, I must do the two together, the geopolitical nature of the Holocaust and how it affected individuals. The picture boiled on what happened to the individual person, individual families, and individual communities. And I created PowerPoint presentation with pictures. Also, I realized young people like to see images from television and whatnot. And there was a pretty good PowerPoint show. And I was hoping it's more effective. Basically, what I wanted to pass on more understanding to young people on any level, that understanding more, how does it start? And the propaganda issue was very important, and especially when the social media appeared on the scene. That really spread propaganda of any kind. But we know, I don't have to tell you how. Finally, we know that social media is both a curse and a blessing. But a great deal of curse nowadays, what's happening as a result of it. So I evolved. Let's put it this way, I evolved. Now, when another thing happened when I retired, and I thank my son forever. He forced me to become computer literate, internet literate, the World Wide Web. 3 W's, that's what it was, World Wide Web, or the information highway. That's how we called it in 20 years ago. Did you know that? So I evolved. So once I had the internet, that really opened up information to me that I couldn't even dream about before. And this is, and also my daughter got up one day, to come to your question finally, to answer your question, because everything has a context, you see. I had to mention what I said before. And she got me a book called Different Voices. The very first book that came out was written by female researchers, Holocaust scholars, and also survivors who became scholars. And it blew me away. It's all women. That's the Different Voices. And that got me on a whole campaign. By that time, there were a couple of good websites on the Holocaust on the internet. And one day I approached one of the editors and said, "Where are the women on your website?" And the guy answered back, "What women?" So I figured, what women? It's just half of those who died and half of those who survived. Half of the Jewish population were women or are women. And that really fired me up. And I said, well, no website about women, I have to create one. But I didn't create it technically. I mean, I needed, from day one help, technical help, and later my son helped a lot. And that's how the website was born out of because there was paucity of information about women in the Holocaust. It wasn't an issue, even among Holocaust scholars. What do you bother with the women? We were all murdered as Jews. Don't break up the reasoning. But as it turned out, well, if you saw my website, there is as Professor Myrna Goldberg pointed out very succinctly, it was the same hell, but different horrors. And that different horrors is what we're talking about, because all Jews were murdered as Jews. It was a racial hatred or racial reasoning. But the women had, because they are women, their gender, their sex, and their everything, mothering, the whole burden or the whole way women live, and because of their gender, it was neglected. It's like nobody really cared. But I don't know how much I contributed to bring extra knowledge about the Holocaust. I just want, and I wasn't an original researcher. I just wanted what academia produced to a bridge. The website was the bridge to bring it to the general public. Because I saw my kids using the internet. They were both in university by then. I saw if they're using it, all the others must be using it. And so let's let that all that knowledge is already accumulated in print to get on the internet and out to, I really had university students in mind, and but also all students and the general public who use the internet. So that's how it was born. That was the reason.
And now it's accessible for all of us, right? And there's so many female stories there for us to dig through.
But now there are many other. Then there are, because there was this conference in 1983, women surviving the Holocaust, that the whole issue of women in the Holocaust emerged. And that Holocaust started all sorts of activities in terms of research. And usually I created another PowerPoint presentation that included the gender issue. That's a long one, an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I would do that not just on my website, but also in my presentations. Whenever I was invited, usually professors teaching women's studies were inviting me to speak to their classes, because it was jive with their studies. So whatever little contribution I made, but now there are many other people and many other websites about women and the Holocaust. And that's what I wanted. I was hoping that those who read it will be inspired, to do further research. Yeah. And I don't know how many people I inspired, but regarding the gender issue, I know I inspired one undergraduate student at Trent University years ago, who actually became a teacher at professor at Ryerson, and he's teaching the whole, I think, European history, and he's teaching the Holocaust.
Beautiful.
He keeps telling me that I inspired him years ago, which is okay. But
I think there are a lot of us, Judy, that feel like you have inspired us more than you know, I think.
Well, that's good to hear, because actually it's not so easy to talk about it. You say whether it affected me. Occasionally I found out if I spoke too frequently, and I spoke all over Canada. I was as far as Victoria and as far as Sydney, Nova Scotia, in various places I was invited to speak. And I didn't sleep well some nights after that. It does something. I'm not sure. I wasn't sad anymore. I was more connected to the history than just to my own personal life. That you do remembrance. We have so many Jewish community, so many remembrances that it's very private, that you really mourn your family. But when I was a public speaker, I didn't mourn particularly my family. I just wanted to transmit certain knowledge that I hoped that it's useful for young people. I know it should be useful if they don't understand their life presently. Don't forget, I'm doing this now almost 3 decades. In every decade, what changed me is our life around us today. Every time, every generation will have their own struggle or own way to understand what's happening around them as the current events and what's happening. So I know I evolved from a victim to an activist.
Beautiful.
And I, of course, I try to talk about, I go back, it's very interesting getting ready for this discussion. I went back to my speeches 10, 20 years ago. And as far back as already 20 years ago, at the time I made the website, I already talked about the dangers appearing today in our political life. I could almost read those speeches to students, how quickly, and because I'm a political animal, how quickly the Cold War, after the the Cold War created a whole different atmosphere in the world. Even the Holocaust didn't unfold to its fullest, and we still don't know everything about the Holocaust. It took at least 25 years. This is the biggest problem I faced when after I was liberated and was well enough and went back to Hungary to look for my family. Because I with my camp sisters, but my own family, I had nobody with me. If you read my memoir, but it was a most traumatic event going back to Hungary and find nobody. But I was lucky enough by one of my youngest of 3 brothers also came back, and that mitigated a little bit. But as soon as I stepped into where I was deported from that place, I broke down crying uncontrollably. It's a very interesting phenomenon to emerge from a genocide. While you're in it, you are busy surviving. That was the meaning, to survive. Right after the liberation, you wanted to get better. You wanted to get back your health. But the trauma was there. Well, am I all alone in the world? But I had an obsession, personal obsession, that if I, the youngest of 7, survived, I was so sure that all my other siblings survived. They were older, they were stronger, they were smarter. And to find the fait accompli, what happened? That only one brother came back at that point. And also I had a few cousins came back, female cousins, who had wives and children. And when I came back from Auschwitz, of course, they never knew Auschwitz. They didn't know what I was talking about. And when I had to tell them that their wives and children were murdered in the gas chambers, they thought I was mad, insane. So the whole idea of what happened in the Holocaust, especially in my city, in 2 or 3 cities in Hungary where some people went to taken to Austria, not to Auschwitz. Different kind of misery, but not as grave as being in death camps. So most of the people who already came back in my city were not in Auschwitz. I was one of the very first, among the few very first Auschwitz survivors to come back. And I come back with the news like this, that I told my brother, and when I met him, I said, don't expect my parents, don't expect them. They never come back. I was the harbinger of terrible news. And it had a terrible effect on me because I couldn't share it with anybody with similar experience. So that wasn't a very good period in my life. That was, in some respect, almost as bad as being in the Holocaust, because what I found, you knew that your whole life just changed, and then when finally we realized, that we have my sister survived too. It took time, communications were not very good, and but she didn't want to come back to Hungary anymore. She didn't want to see. So we left Hungary to meet up with her in a displaced person camp in Germany. And she was liberated 67 pounds, unconscious, by the British. And they brought her back to life. So she was still very shaky when we met her. But we were a family. I had a family, we were 3 of us. It was a rare occasion that 3 people survived from a family. And that displaced person camp was a whole different experience. At that time we complained, but in hindsight, it was one of the healthiest things could have happened to us, a transition to normal life.
And then eventually you made it to Canada.
And yes, well, the Canada thing was that I should have brought the book with me here. I came with a project called the Taylor Project. I don't know if you heard about it.
No.
Are we okay?
Yep, I was looking to see if I could find your book here, Judy.
Not my book, but this is not,
Another one.
The Taylor Project. Well, there was a whole scheme of, even Canada didn't open up its doors to survivors for a long time, for 2 years. In 1947, some orphans came in, but then there was a scheme. Canada needed workers in the clothing industry. And some private Jewish owners of factories finally convinced the government that they want to bring us over, and they guarantee jobs. That's how I came, not knowing anything about sewing. Well, my sister was
Your sister was an expert tailor.
She passed with flying colors. About me, they were hesitating, but my sister wouldn't have come alone. And I had the temerity to tell this gentleman, you want to separate 2 sisters like the Germans did.
And it worked.
Well, in my broken Yiddish, because that was the only language we could come, and they looked at each other and they said, okay, you go too with your sister. But that's a whole different phase in my life, coming to Canada. It's actually the better part of my story.
And that's all in your memoir. If anyone wants to read, Judy's full story, A Cry in Unison, was so beautiful. It takes you through that full story, so you don't have to miss out on anything. So make sure that you do. And Judy, I know you were talking about the going back and forth. As I read your book, I it was an experience for me to reread your book, because I was just, some of the pieces I was wondering, did I remember things correctly? Didn't I? and the one thing I found so neat, because I was actually camping, and as I read it, Judy, I found out we had so much in common too that we wouldn't have talked about on the trip, like our love for camping. I know you guys had a cottage, and the Rocky Mountains. You mentioned in your book that one of your first trips once you came to Canada
Yes.
was out this way.
Well, I tell you, I was, we were in a situation when we came to Canada that we had to rely on ourselves. We had nobody. We got some help from the Canadian Jewish Congress, but basically there was no uncles, no aunts, nobody to ever to turn to help. So we had to grow up. In some respects, I grew up, but in some respects, I remained immature or like a hippie. Yeah, I don't know what to, because finally we worked. I won't go through all the hardships I had in the factory till I found enough skill. I learned enough skill to make a living. After all, I had to eat, have to pay rent, all everyday problems we had to face. But eventually I was managing. But as soon as I had a little money saved, I had the opportunity, I went on a trip. And one of my first trips with Canadian friends by car, we went all across Canada from Montreal to Vancouver. And that's when of course, on our way, Saskatchewan, and it was hot. It was all the flat Saskatchewan. All of a sudden, we would travel north. We hit the Rocky Mountains at Pocahontas, at the Jasper Park. Well, I tell you, it's still in my memory forever. The whole area, just going through Canada, was such a tremendous experience. I mean, who was I? I never traveled before, except I was in Vienna for 6 weeks. Then we went to see my sister, and we were so. But I remember I was a young girl, and there you travel and travel and travel, still the same language. In Europe, I would have gone through 3 different countries with different languages at the same distance. And then we hit the Rockies. It was so magnificent. Yeah, I don't have to tell you, it was beautiful. It was. I said, this is a magnificent country, especially when it comes to, natural beauty. And we went south through the Rocky Mountains. And all the lakes, you look down. I still remember Peyto Lake. Peyto Lake had.
Yeah, Peyto.
Yeah. Oh, it's magnificent. It's the color of the water. It's green and blue and then the Columbia ice fields.
Yeah.
And it wasn't melting yet in those days. Yeah, it's a sad story today. And then down to Banff, right there. But you can imagine, we got the best. And I said to my friends, I said, why do all Canadians, especially Jewish Canadians, always run to Florida when they have so many beautiful things to see in Canada? And interestingly, many of the tourists we met were Germans, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, it didn't bother me. And so that was, and went as far as Vancouver. But then they sold the car and I had to fly back. That's another matter. It was a disaster financially. My sister helped me out. So no, yes, and some other Canadian friends took us to explore northern Quebec. We went as far as Arvida, Chicoutimi, and on the Saguenay River, a little bit of a trip on the river. And then on my honeymoon, we went to the maritime provinces.
Which we also talked about.
Yeah, because my Sid's family originates from Glace Bay, Nova Scotia, on his father's side. His mother's side, no, but his grandparents came at the turn of the century from Russia. So they were already second generation Canadians. Anyway, so I saw a lot of Canada, and I'm still very grateful that I had that opportunity
And
to.
Judy, are you done traveling, or can you still come to visit someday?
Pardon me?
Are you done traveling, do you think? Or can you
No,
still
well,
travel?
yeah, no. Well, we travel later on, all over the world, you know. Then we were getting older, we went on cruises.
Yes,
But
yes.
before that, we went to France and Italy, and you know,
Been all over the world.
yeah. Well, I insisted. I insisted that 2 weeks of a year, it belongs to us.
Perfect.
We got some very good babysitters for
Yes.
the kids, and I said 2 weeks, we deserve it.
That's
Just
good.
the two of us. And he also had to make business trips, and sometimes I went with him, Arizona and whatnot. You know, they had the meetings, and I had a good time. That's how I visited. That's how I visited the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon. I saw the Grand Canyon from a small plane, from the air. It was, you know, I can't say I had a pretty happy life with my husband and my children. Unfortunately, he got sick at 70, you know, Alzheimer, and lasted 16 years, or retirement years. But yes, I was, you know, you can't live with the Holocaust all your life. That's in your life, and you do whatever you can. You become activist, but that doesn't mean we have to stop living. You know, there was a life to be lived, as far as, and he wasn't a survivor. So it was a nice balance. Mind you, when I created my website, he was tremendously supportive. I was on that computer day and night, and sometimes he got a bit annoyed. You know, it's enough. Now we're going. Then we're coming to camping. You see, and I wasn't a camper. I never did camping in my whole life before. But one day he took me to Algonquin Park, but we had just a pop tent. And I said, no, that's not for me. I don't like to sleep on the ground. It's damp, it's this and that. So, okay, he says, but we should try camping with them while the kids are young. He loved it. So we bought a Starcraft and a trailer, and we did a lot of camping, far away places. Then we went to United States. He wanted the sun, you know, when he had the vacation, we could go. I enjoyed camping very much.
Beautiful.
Basically because I love the people you meet at camping. They're entirely different than you meet in hotels. And you know, it's somehow campers respect nature, you know, and take the best advantage what to do in nature. My daughter became a nature lover, just like Sid was. They used to go on their own bicycling, you know, on their various trailers, and also bird watching. Sid was an avid bird watcher. And my daughter, not so much bird watcher, but also like, so it was very enjoyable years.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but I never drove. So he, you know, after a while he got tired of it, you know, dragging that trailer. But, you know, that's why when I sat down to write my memoir, and why did I wait till I was 90 years old? I don't know why. I should have written it earlier while my siblings were still alive, so they could have contributed to it, but I didn't. But the last couple of years of Sid's life, if you can call it life, I was very depressed. I had many depressing days and nights and weeks, and going home and being alone, and after being with him all day in the nursing home, I figured it's time. It's time. If not now, when? it's also filled in my life, with something positive that I can do instead of being depressed. My son was in Vancouver, Michelle moved to Halifax, so I was really alone. And but then months later on, my son came back, and
Yeah, well, I know that we're also grateful that you wrote it.
yeah, as I sat down to write, I said, I had no idea I could write a speech, but writing a book about your life, it's a whole different. I had some help, some volunteer help to start me up, and she was recording me, but then it fizzled out after a while. Finally, I did it on my own, and actually, I enjoyed it.
Great.
I got to the point, especially as I mentioned it in my memoir, when I was back in my childhood, I was back in a peaceful time. It was so nice to read, to write about what I remembered about my own as a crazy kid, and what about my mother. I never, when you're making a political speech, basically, it never time to go into details about your life before the Holocaust. We do, but not in details, because everybody wants to hear the sexy goring details, and so it was nice to sit down and remember my childhood. That's to relive it, as I wrote at what my mother did, how we celebrated holidays. Probably it's boring to other people, but I had fun writing about it.
And I had fun reading about it, Judy. It was anyway, so beautiful for us.
But especially my mother, she was, look, I was only raising 2 kids. How did she manage with 7? Just giving birth. Actually, she had 11.
Yes. Yeah.
And 4 of them died when they were younger. So I think she had a tough life.
Yeah.
Even though we weren't poor and we were middle class, but it must have been. And I always said, it's all my father's fault. It's all my father's fault that part she had so many kids. Birth control, I don't think they knew of anything, but I said, no. Anyways, all my thoughts, no, I didn't write that down. I was just in my mind. But I enjoyed writing it, especially that part. But the rest, I had to do it, the painful part, because it was my life. And after all, it's a memoir. But Judy, I'm glad I finally did it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because just before, I don't want us to run out of time. I know that I wanted your advice for you to speak. I know right now, the world, that Canada is kind of waking up to residential schools. And
yes,
it's people are just, Canada knew as much as, we knew about the Holocaust, but Canada knew about the schools. And people are just, starting to become interested in learning. Do you have any words for any of the survivors who may or may not have told their stories yet?
They are telling it now.
Yeah.
I mean, another survivor, Nate Leipziger, who is working with Facing History and Ourselves, that organization, they were hooking up survivors, Indigenous survivors and Holocaust survivors. And I never went listen to any of them because they were somewhere far. I couldn't get there, drive there myself. But whatever it's worth, they exchanged very painful memories, very painful things that happened to their lives, and usually caused by other people. And I'm thinking about this, that many of us Holocaust survivors, we left behind the country where it happened. we went to Israel or other countries, the indigenous people are staying in the same spot where all this happened to them, and they're facing it in the same milieu. It's, well, people talk about colonialism. Certain history that there was that, but even when Canada became independent, each subsequent governments didn't do much about it. It's just in the last 20 years that this whole issue of the indigenous people suffering and neglect and the circumstances they live, I don't understand it enough. I didn't study it enough. Interestingly enough, that when I lived in Quebec in my early days for 11 years, I did learn quite a bit about Canada's history between the French and the English.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that we didn't understand it exactly, but my sister and I, as we lived, I worked with French Canadians for all the years I worked in the factories. And I write about my experience in the factories. That was a valuable experience for me for the rest of my life. But and the way I became part of the price committee every time, that I was into an economic struggle, right, myself as a blue collar worker. And I tell you, it was good for me to go through that period. But I also learned the animosity between the les Anglais, as they say, les Anglais, and the Francophonie. So history always interested me. And a few times we got, my sister and I got very upset that the way the les Anglais treated the French Canadians right there. I had some, we were a few Jewish persons in the factory where we started, almost French Canadians. And I had some French from 1 year of high school. And I don't know, it's automatically, when I address them, I try to use my few French words. And I respected them. That's their language. That's what they speak. And as soon as I started, I tried to communicate with them in French. They switched to English to make it easier for me. They appreciated the fact that I didn't just automatically expected them to know English, because that was basically the scenario. They expected the French Canadians to become bilingual to accommodate the les Anglais. But very few English people wanted to learn French. They were neighbors. I said, you guys crazy, Jewish and non-Jewish. You have such an opportunity to be multilingual, or at least bilingual. Who needs it? Everybody speaks English in this continent. And they were right. They were resisting it. So finally came in 1961, the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, started by Jesuit priests, and to assert themselves, and their language, because when you use the language, you lose the culture.
Yeah. Now,
And
Judy,
they're very conscious of that.
Yeah.
And we, my sister and I, already knew more French in a few months. My sister had a terrific language, sense of languages. So, and to a European, to speak more languages is an added bonus. It's instead of resisting it. And so, but so many of then everybody who wasn't French and didn't speak French was les Anglais. Even if you came from Italy or you came from Greece, you were bunched together with the les Anglais. But I had very good relationship with my French Canadian co-workers, really. And so did my sister also learned Polish from the Polish workers. But anyways, we became aware of the undercurrent in Canadian history.
Yeah.
And especially one day from our window where we lived on our St. Lawrence Main Street, we saw a commotion as we looked down one Saturday morning, and it was terrible what we saw. We were really shocked. There was a big the Deputy Frere. It was a very large French Canadian store, clothing store, and the people, the workers who went on a strike. Probably they were paid terribly, and they went on a strike. And they were out striking on the street when the Plessis, who was the premier at the time in Quebec, his provincial police just drove on horseback, drove among the girls and injured I don't know how many of them. This is how they wanted to put down the strike. These were all young women. This was police brutality, plain and simple. And it's not the first time, apparently it happened in Quebec. So it was a bit of a different province from the rest. And we really were shocked with our experience to see police brutality in the new world that we came to. It was a real shocker. There were other strikes in Quebec, the asbestos strikes, where the Plessis was a dictator. It was not, he operated in democracy, but he himself was not a very nice premier of the province. So already we got a bit oriented about historical features in Canada, but the Indigenous people, we didn't really know much. For some reason, I don't know, but that really shocked us, I must say.
And Judy, before I know our time is getting a little bit short, I just wanted a few words. Do you have any advice as the world? We know how the world is today, and do you have any advice for us on how we can channel any of our energy or anger or frustration with the current inequities we see in the world?
Well, I am totally at a loss how to answer that. I find this situation, what I observed in the last year, 2 or 3 years alone, it's so complicated. It's so fragile. I cannot even predict what the future might be. Too many people are vying for power, and the way they attack each other on social media, it is frightening. The hatred that developed, not just, well, ethnic hatred is nothing new. That's how the Second World War came about. So there are communities here that are at odds with each other. And there are forces who try to battle it. There are all sorts of big meetings combating anti-Semitism, combating anti-Muslim sentiments, and the black-white issue, and all that mixed together. You have too many hatreds floating around, and the solution, I'm not sure where is the solution. In the North American continent, what happens in the United States is very important. It could easily affect many ways Canada, as you know. And I don't know. I don't know what. All I know is that the individual can do. Like the group we were with at the time. Today, everybody is a voting adult. So one avenue is to use the vote accordingly when it comes around to voting. But it's equally important, if not more, we have to watch what happens in between elections. whoever you voted for, whatever party, the main thing to maintain is, in my opinion, to fight to maintain democracy and the democratic process. If your generation can achieve that, there were all the time, there were different parties, at least two or three, but as long as you stay within the framework of democracy, we are winners, because that's the big danger today.
Yeah.
To deviate from the established norm of democracy and the basic human and civil rights maintained, voting rights, very basic ones. I'm going now also by some expression coming from the United States, because I tell you, I give you an example. What happened in Georgia, in United States, the big fight, who won the whole election. But in Georgia already, they were worried about new laws right now, planning for the 2022 election. And the laws will curtail a huge chunk of Georgian residents, usually the Black residents and the working class, from voting, the way they revised the voting. So this is now, of course, they're going to court about it, but there are sometimes, if you don't watch it, there are maybe some politicians, some political moves, some policies might lay down the ground for something that you will realize how bad it is, but it's too late. So it's important to watch the politicians day to day, the policies, what kind of policies are coming about, or why not some good policies bringing in. And so that's important. So you have to be more political. We can be nice to our neighbors, we can be compassionate in our jobs, but the political scene is very important, because politicians just care about from one 4 years to the other and whether they're going to be reelected. So I think that your generation must be very astute politically and watch what is happening politically by government decisions. And just hold on to democracy, and hopefully to minimize or completely do away with fascist ideology that it's coming in, or of very authoritarian management, like Putin in Russia. The Chinese, of course, have their own forever presidents. President Trump had that tendency, wanted to be like them, presidents forever. So we have to watch. That's all I can tell you. Okay. Otherwise, in our private lives, we can be more compassionate, minding better policy for children and whatnot, but the political process must be watched and fought if it's not happening, or if there are forces who want to destroy it.
And Judy, I know at the end of your book, when I was reading your memoir, at the end, the last couple pages, you wrote this quote, which I wrote down immediately. And I said, yes, like, this is how I want to, you're still teaching me even from a book. It says, individually, each of us must help by making the decision every single day to fight discrimination and manifestations of hatred. And above all, to remember that bad things happen when good people keep quiet.
Yes, that's true, still true. And I am not the originator of that, but it's a good slogan to keep in mind. It's true. It's true. So I think maybe it was, well, I will email you if I get it, who said it first. Okay, yeah. I want to stay in touch with you after this too.
You have no choice.
I hope we covered, we learned more about each other, and we covered what we wanted to as a partner discussion. Having met on a march connected to the Holocaust, now as also Elie Wiesel said that now you listen to a witness, now you're a witness too. Elie Wiesel, who coined that.
Yes.
That I remember. and so this is how we pass on the knowledge, and then it's up to those who listen to what you do with it, you know, in your own personal life, or if you can. Well, I am advocating to become more political, more politically engaged. You know, you can write your MPs, the newspapers, if you don't like something, you know, to newspapers, to the editors. Some small ways. There are so many petitions now going on the internet. I don't know if you notice. I don't even know which is legit, which isn't. But at least people are trying to rectify certain individual causes, or liberate somebody. But even some human rights organization, we Jewish people have a particular beef, because anti-Semitism is a age-old curse in the world, and it is, you know, it's always on an upswing and up and down, depending what time and the history, and whether it's quiet or flares up due to other problems in the country. But we are basically a traumatized people that we never quite sure when we'll become again scapegoats if any problem in a certain situation, because we are a steady minority everywhere. We're everywhere as minority. Also, there is Israel. So we have a particular situation in the world that we're more vulnerable, maybe others. There is also the black and white conflict and the religious conflict. There are all sorts of conflict. Yeah. But again, keep fighting for democracy to stay and the democratic process. And our governors who govern ourselves to adhere by that. Then I think you can't lose.
Okay, and Judy, I have one more thing. So before we go, I know that I was super thankful to get to reconnect with you and get to tell you how over the years you've stayed with me, even though, you know, we didn't stay in touch. But I just have a little video to share, because there were a few other people that were part of the march in 2007, and they wanted to say hello. So we've put it together. So I'm just gonna take it's about 5 minutes, and I'm gonna share my screen and play a little video for you, okay?
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, yes.
I'm hoping this is going to work. So we'll see. Jason's on standby. But you guys let me know. Can you see my screen, Judy?
Yes, yes, I see that. Yes.
All right, this is for you, Judy. Hi, Judy, it's Val Chisholm again. I just wanted to say that I am so grateful for our MRH experience together, for you and Pinkos to take the time out of your lives and spend it with us. Because not only did you spend that period of time with us at MRH, but you have stayed with us over the years. The last 14 years, there hasn't been a week go by that I haven't thought of you guys in some form. So I just want to really thank you. You've quietly been guiding me throughout the last 14 years, and I know that you will continue to in the years to come. I know that I'm not the only one that has been greatly impacted. And so I reached out, and there are a few other people that want to say hello to you. So without further ado, MRH 2007, there are a few others that want to say hello.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say thank you. The stillness and the silence when you were telling your story at Birkenau has lived with me my entire life. What I took away from that was the strength that you showed in telling us your story and reliving it so that we could carry that story on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eloge Butera. I'm a 2007 alumni of the March of Remembrance and Hope. Judy, it's so nice to see you again. And thank you so much for reuniting with us and for sharing your wisdom with us this afternoon, especially in this year that has been harsh, has been challenges, the year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Your words and our journey together in Germany and Poland is to this day still an inspiration to be a witness, an inspiration to stand up for what is right, an inspiration to be an advocate even in the face of extreme and challenging odds. I remember fondly our walks together, our long conversations on the bus, so engrossing indeed that at one point we were separated. We're not lost. We're found in our own voices and conversations, but separated from the rest of the group in Warsaw. And your courage, your resilience, and your strength is with all of us. It's a small seed that grows and shines and takes us to even more brighter and more rich places. In spite of all the suffering that you have endured, still find a smile, and you still find the resolve to teach all of us to do the right thing, to see the right thing, to stand in the right place for the right struggle. So thank you. We love you. We miss you, and we hope that this pandemic has not been too harsh on you, and that in due course, and hopefully in a not so distant future, we all see each other again and in person. Lots of love from Eloge here in Ottawa.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jane here.
Hi.
MRH 2007, and I just want to express profound gratitude to you for everything that you taught me at MRH. And one of the things that I really carry with me is an insistence on, like a stubborn insistence on hopefulness because of the resilience that I witnessed in you and Pinkas. That's my dog in the background saying hello. Yeah, and so I just finished writing a book on critical hope, and so much of what you exemplified through the life that you have lived, so much of that has infused this book that I've written and all of the projects that I do as a faculty member at UBC, just with a real sense of a stubborn commitment to hopefulness. So thank you for that, and I will always try to carry your legacy onward.
Thank you so much.
I hope this meets you.
Hi.
I just want to say thank you for what was a life-changing experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Judy, it's Jeremy, and it's been some time since MRH 2017. I found myself thinking about you today as I was going through old photos and videos from our adventures, and I wanted to remind you of how grateful I am. You and Pinkas opened your lives to myself and so many of my friends. You shared some of your most difficult times, which took courage and passion. And I want you to know that in sharing your stories, you've made a lasting impression on so many people, including myself. For me, when I think about how you've shaped me, how you've asked me to learn from the mistakes of our collective history, our past, and imagine a better and brighter future where each one of us takes on the responsibility to lift someone else up. Your experiences are not only inspiring because of what you've been through, but because of the decisions you've made, the way you've changed the lives of so many people. I am so grateful to have you in my life, and I will always treasure our time together. I also hope that I'll get to see you again soon. Stay safe and know that I'm thinking of you. I love you.
Thank you. I'll be around for a while. I hope. I love you all. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you for that. Was that your idea? Wonderful.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's very nice.
And I will send you the video so you will have it for yourself.
Oh yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. What can I tell you? Whenever you guys get together, you want a speaker, I can be available.
Yes, and I'm sure many of us would love that.
Yeah, and I don't speak very often anymore, but I could make exceptions.
You could make exceptions for us. That's beautiful. Judy, I'm sure Jason's gonna come on here soon and say, you guys have gone over your time limit, which I'm so glad we did, as we always do. Hey, Judy, you and I always go over our time limit.
Yes, well, we have a lot to say. That's it.
You got it. And
thank you very much. I really enjoyed this discussion, and we can do some more privately, you know. But it was nice and to meet Jason, and the whole ambience was great. Thank you so much.
Judy, I can say on behalf of all of us, we're so grateful to have you. Again, I know I'm saying it again, but we are also grateful to have you. And you can see we all love you. And we all
thank you.
Carry your stories on and pass them on. So you have all of these humans all over the world now that are sharing your story and passing them on. And we're so passionate about it. So thank you so much.
I hope I will help somewhat to heal this troubled world. Maybe every voice will help, but we need the major shakers and movers of history to listen to us.
You bet. And we'll say thanks to those who popped on tonight to listen. And I know that I'm sure some people will be watching, if they weren't available, they'll watch the recorded session. So I will wrap up here. I don't think Jason's going to pop back on. So Judy, I will be in touch very soon and we'll catch up in a few weeks, I'm sure.
Okay, very good. And take care of your health.
I will. We love you, Judy.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't know how to get out of this. I'm sorry about the glitch. I still don't know what happened here.
No, it's great that your iPad, I mean, what other 93-year-old could have their computer crash and then have their iPad up and running in minutes to do this? So, Judy.
I am sure there are a few others.
Oh, I don't know, Judy.
But I'm glad, and I tell you, I can thank my son all this.
Yes.
Because he's getting me all the gadgets and then teaching me how to use it. So I am depending. I called him to help me and came in, but he was on another call on his own, you know. So that's why I said, oh, he can help me. Maybe my iPad can. Anyways, thank you. Bye-bye, and say goodbye, whoever is there still. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
I don't know how to. Oh, hi, Jason.
Hey. I'll exit everybody out. I'll just end it, and then.
How was the talk?
Oh, you all did.
Informal, but that's how we wanted.
This is perfect.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
Thank you,
and
Judy.
Everybody else. And I'm available some other time for some interesting talk. I want to learn from others, you know.
Of course.
And Judy, perhaps one day we'll have a little reunion. That would be so beautiful because I know there's a few of us interested in seeing you again. So hopefully we'll plan that in the future.
Well, thank you for this whole idea. I don't know whose idea it was, but it's marvelous to reconnect with the people with whom, you know, like you say, it was 14 years. Lots of things happened in those 14 years, and not everything for the better. But you grew up to be a beautiful young lady.
Thank you.
And I hope soon you'll be a beautiful mother.
Yes, you never know.
Well, anyway, let me know.
I will.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Take care,
Judy.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so
Bye,
much.
Jason. Take
I
care.
can't get out of it now.
All right. Here.
We'll close it.
Yeah, we're going. We're
Yeah,
closing now.
okay. That's